Hello everyone, I'm Terry Duke and welcome to my channel. I'm proud to say that I've become big enough on YouTube that occasionally developers will reach out to give me some free games to try out, one of which happens to be the recently released Manor. Manor is a medieval city builder that has been in development for several years. Probably the wildest thing about it is that there's only one developer working on it, so that's one crazy talented dude. But as of late April, it's been released in early access and became the most wishlisted game on Steam, exceeding 3 million wishlists 4 days before launch. So obviously the game has a lot of hype behind it, and today I ask, is the game as amazing as it looks, or is it being overhyped? If you enjoy the content, make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know what you think of Manor in the comments, as I might make more content on the game in the future. So as I've said, the game is a city builder of sorts, with many layers of micromanagement. The goal of the game is to expand your village into a town, while always making sure your villagers have everything they need. With every new game you start with a few settlers, you gather resources, build homes, do some trading, expand your settlement, and depending on the game type, you can also fight off bandits, as well as go to war with enemy lords controlled by the game. So let's get it out of the way right now, the graphics. For an indie game, they are simply beautiful. You would never know that a single developer worked on this, it is simply a gorgeous looking game. Currently, there is only one map to play on, but it's huge and made up of several regions where resources are randomized in every game. So as you start a new game, you'll often find yourself building according to the environment, effectively ensuring that each new game has some new challenge to it. In terms of gameplay, despite many features not being available yet, the game itself feels pretty complete. As you start your village, you immediately have a wide variety of buildings to suit all the needs of your villagers, from wood camps to hunting grounds for food, as well as plenty of room to plant crops and a simple role mechanic to connect all your buildings together. When it comes to building, it is super easy, and many of the buildings, especially the houses, can be built according to a construction zone you establish yourself, known as flexible plots. So there's a lot of room for customization here, and it's all very intuitive. Where the game gets more challenging very quickly is with maintaining the needs of your villagers. Your population has a constant need for clothing, fuel, and food, and to distribute those resources, you need to set up a marketplace. From there, villagers assigned to specific resources will set up stalls to sell the goods they produce to the rest of the village. The bigger the settlement, the more resources you need, and the more variety of products it needs as well. Although with every new game, you will get a better understanding of the mechanics to really maximize productivity. And broadly, that's what the game is all about. There is no campaign on multiplayer yet, just a few game modes, but they are all fully playable, so in this next part, I'll give you an overview of the different game types. Currently, there are 3: Rise to Prosperity, Restore the Peace, and On the Edge. In Rise to Prosperity, there are no enemies whatsoever, the only goal is to grow your settlement in peace. One of the biggest challenges in the game, I'd say, is having a steady supply of food. You can initially start by collecting berries and hunting animals, but as your population increases, this is not even remotely enough. For the long term, there's an entire mechanic dedicated to farming by setting up fields for crops, but that's very different from other similar games. For starters, you don't just plant fields and let villagers do the work automatically like in any other RTS. In Manor, there's a very strong emphasis on realism. Namely, the two biggest factors that affect farming are land fertility and harvesting season. When it comes to fertility, this determines the likelihood of crops being able to grow at all, which is largely decided by the quality of the land itself. So whenever you start to plan out fields, you can immediately see which area is good and which is bad. Because the map is randomized, you could start on very fertile lands just as easily as the opposite, which can drastically change how you play the game. Secondly, the game has an entire year system, with all 4 seasons and dynamic weather, so you can only plant crops once per year and the timing has to be just right, otherwise you could screw up the whole harvest. And much like in real life, if you use the same plot of land without giving it time to rest, the fertility gets gradually worse every year, so you'll end up needing at least 2 fields and going back and forth between them every year to keep fertility high. So yeah, I ain't kidding, the game is very realistic in that aspect, and your game can end up revolving around farming quite a lot. So as my village grew, I went from hunting animals and collecting berries to growing wheat to make bread. Another really cool feature in the game is that homes don't just provide housing for the population, they can also be built with backyards from where shops and gardens can be installed to produce stuff passively. So as I built my houses, I would install lots of gardens and chicken coops to bring more variety of food. The biggest challenge though was getting access to barley. Barley is used to make ale for the tavern, which doesn't just increase your popular approval, it's a necessary resource to upgrade the houses to their max level. And barley is virtually always impossible to grow unless you have very good land fertility. So to get some barley, I had to import it via a trading post, but it's very expensive. So to cover the cost, I started mining clay from a nearby pit, which I turned into roof tiles that I then sold. It was a fairly effective system, but to save on cost, I decided to acquire a neighboring region where barley could grow better, and so I started a second village. This was actually my first time doing this in the game, but regardless of what region you start in, you can set up villages in other regions that have other resources. And it turns out regions in the games are effectively completely independent from one another. You can use mules to transport goods from one region to the next, but basically, whatever you're growing in one region is not automatically accessible in the other. So if you already had a lot of food, you could either send it to your second village, or that second village would need to grow its own food to sustain itself. So I put the emphasis on barley crops for the second village, building lots of homes for the manpower, and keeping the absolute bare minimum in terms of food and fuel to keep everyone alive. And I set up a checkpoint so that when the huge fields of barley were harvested, I could send it all to my main town to keep the tyrant full. These simple projects were often more difficult than I thought, but overall it was a fun game that lasted a few hours. When playing Rise to Prosperity, since there's no active threats from bandits or other lords, it really is the ultimate city building experience, where you can be very laid back and listen to your podcast at the same time. As a final addition, I will say I really love the third person option. Since you're a lord, you can click the eyeball at the top right, and when you do, you'll walk into your village in third person. I'm not sure that there's a whole lot more to it as the feature isn't complete yet, but it works, and walking around your village after spending hours building it is oddly satisfying. But anyway, yeah, that's Rise to Prosperity. In the second game mode, Restoring the Peace, in addition to building your village, you need to fight off raiders and claim all regions on the map, as an enemy baron will try and claim them as well. So while most of the game is largely about expanding your settlement, there is now some emphasis on warfare, and that's also where realism makes it a lot more challenging than your standard RTS. In Manor Lords, there are three ways of getting troops. The first one, the standard, is the Lord's Retinue. These are professional soldiers, they're expensive to hire and expensive to upgrade, but the cost is upfront and has no upkeep that I know of, and then you can just summon them at any time for any situation. Mercenaries can also be hired, but they have a monthly, more expensive fee. However, they come with their own equipment and they're generally reliable. But by far the most complex but somehow most reliable way of getting troops is by raising militias from your villagers. This is where I say that the game gets even more challenging. It's not like a regular RTS where you can just recruit units out of thin air and go from there. In Manor Lords, the bulk of your army will be your villagers. So for a single spear militia of 36 men, you need at least 36 men in your village. You also need to provide 36 spears and 36 shields, and unless you produce 36 helmets and 36 armors, they won't wear either when deployed. So part of getting an army going in Manor Lords is to carefully set the resources and infrastructure to really make sure everything is supplied when needed. And a lot of that works through home upgrades like before, but instead of placing vegetable gardens and chicken coops in the backyards, you'll now have to add a blacksmith to make weapons and an armorer to make helmets. And then you'll need to build the resource buildings to ensure crafting materials like iron and wood are supplied. And then you'll need a big enough population that you can call up militias. Ultimately, the quality of the militia really depends on the quality of the weapons and armors you provide, and once you have everything, they don't cost anything to call up. However, every villager called up is a villager less to gather resources. So even in that context, you'll want to time your battles with other things, like harvesting season, because if all your villagers are busy fighting off wars, when the crops are ready, you may end up losing the entire batch. Usually I'm the kind of person to say that realism in video games just makes gameplay worse, but in this context, having these barriers doesn't really make the game worse, it just challenges you to play differently from other games. And in that sense, it can be a struggle at first, but I've also really enjoyed the change. So in my second game, developing the town was pretty easy early on, but over time I started to struggle to keep my population fed, as I just wasn't growing enough wheat. On a few occasions I was attacked by groups of raiders, but I could cut up my militias and mercenaries just in time, and we sent them back packing. As I started claiming more lands, I inevitably challenged the Baron. The Baron is the main enemy AI, and although he does not have a village on the map, he will spawn with an army when regions are being contested. And so he did, with a large army mostly made up of mercenaries. The gameplay for battles is very similar to Total War in that you deploy your troops in formation in real time, and there's the same mechanics of fatigue from running all over the place, morale from either losing or winning, and terrain that can give an advantage. And I gotta tell you, the AI does not mess around. At one point he tried to flank with his archers and really started decimating some of my troops, but everywhere else the line held and eventually I won. Overall, it was a fun game, but the struggle to keep a steady supply of food really was difficult. So I ended up claiming another region that had lots of fertile lands, but then the enemy Baron showed up again, with another army as if he had never lost the previous battle. I beat him again and started planting fields in the new region, but by then it was getting a bit grindy. The goal of restoring the peace is to get each region, and if that lord's gonna show up with an army every time, it's gonna get repetitive real quick. Not that it can't be done, mind you, but currently, this game mode really is the one to put your management skills to the test, as you administer administer multiple regions, and always need to be ready to deploy well-equipped militias to fight off the Baron. And that leaves us with On the Edge, which is like an in-between of the two previous game modes. The goal is to build up your settlement, but while you don't have to conquer every region or fight the Baron, you will be constantly pestered by raiders who either steal your supplies or occasionally try and raid your settlement. And that's pretty much all there is to it. By now I was a fairly experienced player, so taking care of the bandits with my retinue was no problem. I also had very fertile lands, so I made several massive fields to support the population. I also started experimenting with homes by making the backyards way bigger, which yielded even more vegetables, so that's a good trick right there. But that's about it. That's Manor for you, or at least as it stands currently in early access. So to answer this video's question, is the game overhyped? I would say yes. To be clear, it's not a bad game at all. In fact, it's pretty good for what it aims to do, but I do think this is an instance of a game getting overhyped through no control of the developer. It just hit the spotlight at the right time, and the more people talked about it, the more it got wishlisted, which led to more hype and more wishlisting and so on. In the end, it's a medieval city builder. I haven't played many others, but the closest comparisons I can think of are the Stronghold games, which already did a lot of the same things that Manor does. There's definitely an appeal to Manor from the graphics to the insane level of micromanagement to the Total War style of battles, but the main appeal isn't what the game offers right now, it's what it's going to offer in the future. As I've said, there's only one map right now, but they will add more eventually. Currently, the only enemy AI does not even build a town of his own, so open warfare and other game modes are still limited. Even the main wallpaper for the game is a bit misleading currently. This level of building is not yet accessible to my knowledge. We're still pretty much in the village area. So yes, I do believe currently the game is overhyped. Don't get me wrong, it's still a good game, but manage your expectations is what I'm saying. And on the bright side, it might be in early access, but what we do have is very stable. I did not experience any serious bugs at all. The only things that come to mind is the walking through walls in third person, and the crop rotation of fields switching up on me at random, but nothing besides that. So in conclusion, if you're looking for a cool medieval sim game that brings unique challenges to complex gameplay elements, or if you're looking to build a massive town over several regions and a massive map, or you just want a game you can play casually while listening to your favorite content creator, then Manor is for you. But if you're looking for an absolute masterpiece, you might have to wait for a while. And that's all I got for today, so thanks for watching everyone. I really enjoyed playing Manor while making this video, so it's likely I still play it for a while. If you want me to make more content on it, the easiest way to tell me is by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. At this rate, I might reach 10,000 subscribers in about 6 months, but you can always make it happen sooner, and I appreciate everyone who does. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time.